"I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of the disappointment she was carrying. He didn't press further, simply smiled and sipped his tea, giving her space to gather herself. After a moment, she found herself speaking, almost without thinking. "I'm on a blind date," she said quietly. "And it's not going well." The man's eyes softened. "I see," he said gently. "Sometimes that happens. It's not easy to connect with someone you've never met, but it doesn't mean the evening is lost. Sometimes a small change in perspective can make all the difference." She looked at him, surprised. She hadn't expected understanding or wisdom from someone she didn't know. She expected polite nods, or maybe a distracted glance. But he was listening, really listening, and that alone felt comforting. She took a deep breath, feeling a slight weight lift from her chest. He asked simple questions, the kind that didn't demand long answers but gave her space to speak. "What's something that makes you happy?" he asked, not expecting grand gestures or dramatic stories, just a simple connection. She hesitated at first, then mentioned her love for walking in the park near her apartment, watching the leaves change with the seasons, and how it made her feel peaceful. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand that. Nature has a way of grounding us when everything else feels chaotic. It's a quiet kind of magic." She smiled faintly, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through her. The conversation wasn't forced. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about simply sharing a moment, a connection that felt natural and unhurried. She began to relax in a way she hadn't since entering the cafe. The stranger shared stories of his own life, small anecdotes from his past. He spoke of times when he felt overlooked, when others ignored him, and how he learned to value his own presence instead of waiting for others to acknowledge it. His words weren't preachy or grand, just honest and relatable. She found herself nodding, recognizing pieces of her own experience in his stories. He told her about a trip he took to a small village years ago, where people greeted strangers with smiles and simple kindness, reminding him that connection was often found in unexpected places. He spoke about how small gestures, a smile, a listening ear, a simple acknowledgement, could transform someone's day. She listened intently, captivated by the calmness and clarity in his words. As he spoke, she felt her mood shift. The heaviness that had been weighing her down began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of relief and curiosity. She laughed softly at some of his stories, surprised at how easily the sound came from her lips. The sound itself felt freeing, like shedding a layer of tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. The blind date across the table seemed to notice her change, attempting to engage, but she barely acknowledged him. Her attention had shifted. She realized that her energy and focus no longer had to depend on someone else's distracted attention. She could choose how to spend her evening, and in that choice, she found a spark of empowerment. She asked the stranger questions in return, curious about his experiences and thoughts. He answered patiently, never rushing, never making her feel small for asking or sharing. The dialogue felt balanced, a genuine exchange, and it reminded her how conversations could feel effortless and nourishing when the right energy was present. At some point, they spoke about small joys, the taste of a favorite meal, the feeling of a soft blanket on a cold night, the comfort of a good book. The simplicity of these moments, the focus on everyday pleasures, reminded her that happiness wasn't always found in grand gestures or dramatic events. It could be quiet, subtle, and still profoundly impactful. She noticed the details of the cafe again, the soft hum of the music, the scent of fresh coffee, the warm light reflecting off the wooden tables. She felt more present, more alive in the moment, noticing things she had overlooked when wrapped in her initial disappointment. The stranger's words had redirected her attention from frustration to appreciation, from sadness to engagement. They spoke for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was just a portion of the evening. She felt her energy returning, her confidence quietly rebuilding. The stranger's presence had reminded her that connection was possible, even in unexpected ways, and that small acts of attention and kindness could have a significant impact. At one point, he smiled at her and said, "Sometimes it's not about waiting for someone to notice you. It's about noticing yourself and letting the world see that. When you do, you'll find people who truly value your presence." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. The words resonated deeply, more than she expected. She realized she had been so focused on trying to gain the attention of someone who didn't value it, that she had forgotten to honor herself. In that moment, she felt a subtle shift, a quiet empowerment that she hadn't felt at the start of the evening. She looked across the cafe and noticed other people talking, laughing, and connecting. But she no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She felt part of the world around her, noticing, appreciating, and engaging in her own way. The stranger's presence had helped her see that connection wasn't always dependent on others' recognition. It could be created through one's own choices and mindset. Her blind date tried once more to join the conversation, but she smiled politely and returned to her discussion with the stranger. She realized she didn't owe her attention to anyone who didn't offer genuine engagement. She could spend her time and energy where it was appreciated, where it mattered, and that realization gave her a sense of liberation. By the time she glanced at the clock, hours had passed without her noticing. She felt light, refreshed, and strangely invigorated. The weight of disappointment had been replaced with a sense of possibility and openness. The stranger had transformed her evening not through grand gestures but through attentive listening, kind words, and genuine presence. As she prepared to leave the cafe later, she thanked him sincerely. He nodded, smiling, and said, "Remember, even small moments of understanding can change everything. Don't forget that." She stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude and renewed self-confidence. The evening had begun with disappointment, but a stranger's kindness had shown her that even in unexpected moments, connection and empowerment could be found. She walked down the street with her head held higher, noticing the lights reflecting off wet pavement, the sound of distant traffic, and the calm rhythm of the city night. She felt lighter, freer, and ready to carry this unexpected lesson forward. What had started as a disheartening blind date had turned into a night she would remember, not because of romance, but because of the simple, profound impact of human kindness and understanding. She felt a small but steady sense of calm settling over her as she continued to converse with the stranger. For the first time that evening, she felt like she was truly present in the moment. The tension that had built up over the awkward start to her blind date was melting away, replaced by curiosity and a gentle warmth. She realized that she no longer needed validation from her date across the table. She could enjoy the evening on her own terms. She took a sip of her coffee and noticed how the steam rose slowly, curling into the soft light above. She felt grounded by the simple, ordinary moment, and it made her smile. The stranger spoke again, telling her about the small joys he found in life: the smell of fresh rain on the sidewalk, the sound of birds in the early morning, the feel of worn pages in an old book. She listened intently, realizing how easily happiness could be found in the little things when one paused to notice them. Encouraged by his openness, she began to share her own simple pleasures, talking about the quiet moments she cherished and the small rituals that made her feel centered. She realized she had been so focused on the disappointment of the blind date that she had almost forgotten to acknowledge the good things that already existed in her life. The act of sharing them aloud felt surprisingly liberating. The stranger nodded, listening with genuine interest. He asked questions that didn't feel forced or rehearsed but flowed naturally. He asked about her favorite books, the music she enjoyed, and the kinds of walks she liked to take. She realized that in this exchange she felt seen, not judged or overlooked. It was a refreshing contrast to the blank responses she had received earlier. She laughed at one of his stories, a tale about getting lost in a small town during a trip, relying on the kindness of strangers to find his way. The simplicity of it, combined with the warmth in his voice, made her chuckle genuinely, a sound that felt unfamiliar but pleasant. She was reminded that laughter could be a quiet kind of release, a way to shake off tension and disappointment. At one point, she glanced back at her blind date. He seemed to be scrolling on his phone again, barely noticing her presence. She felt no frustration this time, only a quiet clarity. She didn't need his approval or attention. Her energy was better spent focusing on what brought her comfort and joy, and that realization gave her a sense of quiet empowerment. The stranger shared a small piece of advice, one that struck her deeply. "It's okay to step back from situations that drain you," he said gently. "Sometimes, the best thing we can do is redirect our energy toward people and moments that make us feel alive." Shh! She arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, as if being on time could somehow give her confidence. The autumn air was crisp, and a faint smell of baked bread from a nearby bakery mixed with the city's usual scent of gasoline and damp pavement. She adjusted the scarf around her neck, straightened her coat, and walked inside, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The cafe was cozy, with soft lighting, small wooden tables, and the faint murmur of conversations that gave the place a warm atmosphere. She scanned the room and chose a table near the window, one where she could watch people pass by while feeling a little invisible herself. As she sat, she pulled her notebook from her bag. Not that she planned to write much, but it gave her something to do with her hands. She opened it and doodled absent-mindedly, a way to calm the fluttering in her chest. She sipped her coffee, hoping it would steady her nerves. Every few moments she checked the door, half expecting to see him walking in, and each time the door opened her heart leapt, only to sink when it was someone else. She thought about what her friend had said when arranging the blind date. "He's nice, smart, and funny," her friend had said with a hopeful smile. That smile stayed with her, almost like a shield. She wanted to believe it. She wanted this to go well. But deep down she worried. What if they had nothing in common? What if he was rude or distracted? What if she said something silly? Her mind raced through all the possible scenarios, none of them particularly comforting. Finally, the door opened and a man walked in, looking around as if he belonged somewhere else entirely. He was casually dressed and there was a slight hurry in his movements. When he spotted her, he nodded vaguely and slid into the chair across from her. "Hi," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of hope and nervousness. "Hey," he replied, not making eye contact, already pulling out his phone. He tapped on the screen, thumbs moving fast, barely acknowledging her presence. She paused, unsure if she should wait or try to start a conversation. "So, how was your day?" she asked, trying to sound casual, giving herself a moment to breathe. "Busy," he muttered, eyes still fixed on his phone. She nodded, staring at her coffee, wondering if she had misjudged him. She tried again. "Did you get a chance to try that new restaurant downtown? I heard it's really good." "Not really," he said, scrolling. "Too much work." She smiled politely, though inside, disappointment started to settle like a heavy stone. She felt her energy draining, her earlier excitement fading. She sipped her coffee again, hoping the warmth would fill some of the emptiness she was beginning to feel. Her fingers drummed lightly on the table, a nervous habit she hadn't noticed until now. She wanted to ask more questions to spark a conversation, but every attempt seemed met with silence or distracted replies. Time passed slowly. She tried to laugh lightly at his occasional attempts at small talk, but the effort felt one-sided. She realized that for every word she spoke, he offered barely a nod, a grunt, or a distracted uh-huh. She wondered if she should just give up, excuse herself politely, and leave. But she stayed, telling herself that maybe he was just nervous. Maybe this wasn't his usual self. Maybe things could still turn around. She looked around the cafe, noticing other pairs and groups talking, laughing, sharing moments that felt so different from her own experience. It was almost painful to watch. She felt invisible, as if she had been placed in the corner of someone else's life and forgotten. The sounds around her, the clinking of cups, soft laughter, the low hum of conversation, mixed with her own thoughts, creating a whirlpool of self-doubt and unease. She tried to focus on her notebook again, drawing simple lines and shapes, anything to distract herself from the quiet disappointment of being ignored. She thought of her friends, how they would have teased her gently if they were here, how they would have told her to not take this too seriously. A small smile flickered on her face at the memory, but it didn't last long. She glanced at him, hoping to catch a spark of genuine engagement, some sign that he was present, but he was still absorbed in his phone, thumbs moving quickly, eyes darting across the screen. She ordered a pastry, thinking maybe the taste of something sweet would cheer her up, but even that didn't seem to help. Each bite reminded her of the silence across the table, the lack of connection. She wondered why blind dates always seemed like a gamble, why people expected to click with strangers. She had hoped for laughter, for stories, for shared glances and moments of understanding. Instead, she felt like a shadow, fading into the background of someone else's attention. She noticed a small group of people entering the cafe, chatting animatedly, their faces bright with joy. Their energy seemed to fill the room, and for a moment she envied them. She longed for a conversation that felt alive, where words bounced back and forth effortlessly, where presence mattered more than distraction. She glanced back at him, hoping that maybe he would notice her longing. But he remained fixed on the screen, the light from the phone illuminating his face in a way that felt distant and cold. The waitress came by to refill their drinks. She smiled at the woman politely, murmured a thank you, and then turned her attention back to her coffee, hoping for a spark, a moment of connection that didn't come. She felt the heaviness of the evening settling over her like a blanket. The nerves that had been buzzing with anticipation had dulled into a quiet ache of disappointment. She considered standing up, leaving without a word, escaping the awkwardness that seemed to define the table. But she stayed, feeling a mixture of stubbornness and hope. Maybe, just maybe, he would notice her, would look up from the screen, would say something that felt like a conversation instead of a monologue. She reminded herself that this was just one evening, one encounter, and it didn't define her worth. Yet the feeling of being ignored gnawed at her quietly, a whisper of self-doubt she couldn't shake. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. She tried to engage him in conversation one more time, talking about a movie she had recently seen, describing the scene with enthusiasm and hope. He nodded occasionally, muttering a few words, but the spark she had hoped for was absent. She realized that the evening was not going as she had imagined, not at all. She felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and sadness, wondering why she had expected anything different, why she had allowed herself to hope. Her eyes wandered to the window, watching the people passing by living their own stories. She imagined their conversations, their laughter, the effortless way they connected with each other. She felt isolated in comparison, a silent observer of a world that seemed just out of reach. She sipped her coffee again, trying to find comfort in the familiar warmth, in the small act of self-care that she had planned for herself. She thought about the friend who had set up the blind date, hoping for a positive outcome, and felt a twinge of guilt. She didn't want to be ungrateful, but she couldn't help the sinking feeling in her chest. She had come with an open heart, ready to engage, ready to share a part of herself, but the response had been minimal, distant, disconnected. She felt unseen, not because she wasn't there, but because the attention she longed for was absent. The evening stretched on. She watched as the light outside dimmed, shadows growing longer, the cafe filling with a softer, warmer glow. She tried to remind herself of the small things she could control, her posture, her smile, the calmness she could carry with her, but it was difficult to maintain that composure when the experience felt so disappointing. She felt small, almost invisible in the face of indifference. And yet, even in the quiet discomfort, there was a flicker of resilience. She reminded herself that she had arrived, that she had taken the step to meet someone new, to open herself to possibility. That in itself was something to acknowledge. She drew another doodle in her notebook, a small, simple pattern, and felt a tiny sense of accomplishment. She could still hold on to something, even if the evening was not going as she had imagined. As she took a deep breath, trying to center herself, she noticed a shadow move at a nearby table, someone watching her with gentle curiosity. She didn't understand why, but something in that glance felt comforting, different from the indifference she had faced across her own table. She returned a small smile, hesitant but genuine. It was a tiny spark, just enough to remind her that not all attention was absent, not all moments were lost. She didn't know it yet, but this would mark the beginning of a change. A shift in her evening that she could never have predicted, a moment where a stranger's words would reach her in a way she hadn't expected. For now, she remained at her table, quietly sipping her coffee, waiting, hoping, and noticing the small details that would soon become significant. She was about to gather her things and quietly leave, when a voice broke through her thoughts. It was soft, kind, and unexpectedly warm. "Are you okay?" a man asked, sitting at a nearby table. He looked to be older, with gentle eyes that carried a calm understanding, and his tone was filled with curiosity rather than intrusion. She blinked, startled. Talking to a stranger wasn't something she usually did, especially not in moments when she felt small and defeated. But something about the way he spoke, the calmness in his demeanor, made her pause. She looked up from her notebook, hesitated, and then nodded slowly. Nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She had spent too long trying to fit herself into a space where she wasn't fully appreciated. Now she understood that she could choose where to invest her energy. Encouraged, she ordered a dessert for herself, a simple pastry she had always liked but rarely treated herself to. As she took the first bite, she savored the sweetness, noticing the texture and flavor in a way she hadn't before. It was a small act, but it felt like a declaration of self-care, a way to reclaim part of the evening for herself. The stranger smiled as he observed her enjoying it, and she felt a surge of appreciation for his quiet support. She and the stranger continued to talk about their experiences, sharing stories of moments when they felt overlooked and how they learned to navigate such situations. His calm demeanor and thoughtful words made her feel like she was part of a safe space, a place where she could reflect without fear of judgment. She began to notice the rhythm of the cafe, the soft background music, the murmur of other conversations, the gentle clatter of cups and plates. These small details, previously unnoticed, now contributed to a sense of comfort and presence. As she spoke about her own experiences, she realized that the disappointment she had felt earlier had taught her something important. She had allowed herself to hope, to be vulnerable, and while that hope had been met with indifference, it had also prepared her to appreciate the unexpected kindness she found with the stranger. She understood that vulnerability could be powerful, not because it always led to positive outcomes, but because it allowed her to connect with others in authentic ways. The conversation flowed naturally, and she found herself smiling more often than she had all evening. She realized that she was no longer anxious or tense. The awkwardness of the blind date seemed almost distant now, replaced by a growing sense of presence and calm. She felt her shoulders relax, her breathing become steadier, and her mind more focused on the moment rather than the disappointment. The stranger asked her about her dreams, not the kind that felt pressured by society, but the quiet hope she held in her heart. She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to speak them aloud, but he waited patiently, offering her the space to share without judgment. She spoke about small ambitions, learning new skills, spending more time with friends, taking care of her well-being, and exploring places she had never visited. Each word felt freeing, as if voicing these hopes made them feel more tangible. He nodded and shared his own experiences of pursuing small ambitions, the kind that weren't glamorous but meaningful. He spoke about the satisfaction of achieving personal goals, the contentment that came from investing in oneself, rather than seeking external approval. She listened, absorbing the simplicity and truth in his words, and realized that she had been looking for validation in the wrong places. As the evening wore on, she felt a sense of connection that she hadn't expected. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was quiet, human, and genuine. She understood that meaningful interactions didn't have to be flashy or intense. They could be simple, thoughtful, and present. She had spent so much energy hoping for attention and engagement, but now she saw that real connection could emerge naturally, when nurtured with openness and patience. She glanced once more at her blind date, who was still preoccupied with his phone. She felt no resentment or disappointment this time. She had found what she needed elsewhere, in a conversation that felt genuine and supportive. She realized that sometimes the best experiences came from unexpected sources, and she felt grateful for the lesson. The stranger's presence had transformed her evening. She felt lighter, more aware, and more confident. The awkward start and the initial disappointment were no longer the focus. They were simply a contrast to the warmth and connection she was experiencing now. She understood that moments of kindness and genuine attention could change the course of a day, even an evening that seemed ruined at first. When she finally stood to leave, she thanked the stranger sincerely. He smiled and said, "Remember, every small act of attention and care can make a difference. Don't underestimate your own presence." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The evening had begun with tension and disappointment, but it was ending with clarity, empowerment, and a renewed sense of self. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, She felt a gentle pride in how she had navigated the evening. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, experienced disappointment, and yet she had discovered a moment of genuine human connection. She walked home slowly, noticing the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, the distant hum of traffic and the calm rhythm of the night. Each step felt deliberate, as if she were carrying the lesson of the evening forward with her. She realized that life's most meaningful moments often arrived quietly, without fanfare or expectation. A simple conversation, a few kind words, or genuine attention could transform a situation entirely. The stranger had not changed her date or the circumstances, but he had shifted her perspective, allowing her to reclaim her evening and her confidence. As she reached her apartment, she paused, reflecting on the night. She understood that the way she responded to disappointment, the way she chose to engage with others, and the moments she allowed herself to notice were all within her control. That realization gave her a quiet sense of empowerment, a feeling that she could carry forward into future experiences. She unlocked her door, stepped inside, and felt a sense of completion. The evening had started with hope, moved through disappointment, and ended with unexpected understanding and growth. She smiled to herself, grateful for the encounter that had reminded her of the value of attention, presence, and kindness. The night had offered her more than she had anticipated, and she felt ready to embrace whatever came next with patience, openness, and confidence. The woman sat back in her chair, feeling more at ease than she had in hours. The stranger across from her spoke gently, sharing another story from his past. This one was about a moment when he had felt completely overlooked, ignored in a meeting where he had worked hard and tried to contribute. He spoke of the frustration, the quiet anger, and the lesson he learned about valuing his own voice first before expecting others to notice it. She listened intently, nodding in quiet understanding. It was as if his experiences mirrored her own, giving her a perspective she hadn't considered. She reflected on her evening, the way her blind date had barely acknowledged her, and how it had initially left her feeling invisible. Now through this conversation, she saw that being ignored by someone else did not define her worth or her value. The stranger's words were like a gentle hand, guiding her to realize that attention and validation often came from unexpected places, and sometimes from within herself. The stranger asked her about the moments when she felt unseen, not just tonight but in her life. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted to voice her insecurities, but the calmness in his presence made her open up. She spoke about times at work when her contributions were overlooked, times with friends when her ideas were dismissed, and moments in public where she felt invisible. As she spoke, she felt a release, a sense of relief in sharing these thoughts with someone who genuinely listened. He responded with thoughtful words, not trying to solve her problems, but offering perspectives that encouraged self-reflection. Sometimes, he said softly, we wait too long for others to recognize us when we have the power to see ourselves first. When we do, the world seems different. People who truly matter will notice, but your own awareness is the most important. She pondered this, realizing the truth in his statement. She had been seeking acknowledgement and engagement from her blind date, expecting someone else to affirm her presence. Now she understood that empowerment could begin from within. She could recognize her own value and allow that confidence to radiate outward. This shift in perspective made her feel lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The conversation flowed naturally. They talked about small victories in life, the moments of quiet pride when one achieves something personally meaningful, even if unnoticed by others. She shared her own little accomplishments, like finishing a challenging project at work or mastering a recipe she had been struggling with. The stranger nodded and smiled, acknowledging her efforts and encouraging her to celebrate these moments. He shared stories from his travels, times when he encountered strangers who offered unexpected kindness or support. These were ordinary moments, like someone holding a door, offering a seat, or giving a smile, but they had profound effects on his mood and outlook. She realized how these small gestures could transform one's perspective, and she thought about the simple acts she could offer to others, the ways she could contribute positivity in her own life. The woman began to notice the ambiance of the cafe differently. The warm light, the soft music, and the gentle clatter of cups and plates seemed more comforting now. She had shifted her focus from disappointment to appreciation, seeing beauty in the ordinary details she had overlooked before. She felt present, engaged, and alive rather than lost in her own frustration. She glanced once at her blind date, who was still distracted and felt no bitterness. The evening no longer depended on his attention or approval. She understood that she could create her own moments of joy and connection, independent of others' behavior. The stranger's presence had shown her that meaningful interaction didn't require prior familiarity or romantic interest. It could simply be the result of genuine human engagement and attentive listening. They spoke about resilience and the importance of maintaining hope, even when circumstances seemed discouraging. The stranger emphasized the small steps one could take to regain confidence, the importance of self-kindness, and the value of seeking connections that uplift rather than drain. She absorbed these words, realizing how relevant they were to her own life, not just tonight but in many past situations where she had felt overlooked. As the evening continued, she found herself laughing and sharing stories freely. The atmosphere around them seemed to mirror her growing ease, and she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her. The simple act of being heard and acknowledged had reignited a sense of optimism, a feeling that her presence mattered, not because someone else decided it did, but because she recognized it herself. The stranger asked her about the qualities she valued in people, and she reflected on honesty, empathy, and attentiveness. They discussed how these qualities could transform ordinary interactions into meaningful connections. She thought about the times she had been overlooked by those who lacked these qualities and recognized that the presence of such traits in others could make a significant difference in her experience of life. She felt empowered by the realization that she could cultivate similar qualities in herself, creating a space where others could feel seen and valued. This shift in perspective helped her understand that meaningful interaction wasn't just about receiving attention, it was also about offering it. The evening had subtly transformed from a failed blind date to a lesson in self-awareness, empathy, and human connection. They spoke about future possibilities, not as grand ambitions but as simple, achievable goals that could enrich daily life. She talked about wanting to explore new hobbies, spend more time in nature, and connect more deeply with friends and family. The stranger encouraged her, affirming that small, consistent efforts could lead to meaningful change and personal growth. As the cafe began to empty, she felt a sense of closure, a gentle completion to an evening that had started with disappointment. She had not expected to find wisdom, insight, and connection in a quiet corner of the cafe, yet she had. The stranger's presence had guided her to recognize her own strength, resilience, and capacity for joy. She glanced at him and said softly, "Thank you. I didn't expect tonight to be like this, but I feel different. Lighter maybe and more aware." He smiled warmly. "Sometimes the smallest encounters leave the biggest impact. Remember to carry this feeling with you and don't forget your own value." She nodded, feeling a genuine sense of gratitude. The lesson of the evening wasn't about the blind date or the disappointment she had initially felt. It was about noticing kindness, embracing presence, and valuing herself even when others failed to do so. The stranger had offered her more than conversation. He had offered perspective, encouragement, and a gentle reminder of the power of human connection. When she finally stood to leave, she felt a quiet confidence. She had learned that her happiness wasn't dependent on someone else's behavior, that small gestures and words could transform an experience, and that valuing herself was the first step toward meaningful connection. The night had shifted from frustration to reflection, from disappointment to insight, leaving her with a renewed sense of self and a lesson she would carry forward. As she stepped outside, the city lights reflected off the pavement, casting soft glows on the streets. She walked home slowly, savoring the cool air and the calm rhythm of the night. Each step felt deliberate, grounded, and thoughtful. She realized that moments of understanding and connection could appear unexpectedly, and when they did, they could change the course of one's evening, mood, and even perspective. She entered her apartment building feeling more present and centered than when she had arrived. The evening had been transformed not by grand events but by simple, genuine human interaction. She thought about the stranger's words, the stories he shared, and the way he had listened. She understood that connection wasn't about romance, attention, or validation. It was about empathy, presence, and openness. Sitting in her living room, she reflected on the lessons of the evening. She understood that disappointment and being overlooked were inevitable parts of life, but how she responded to them was within her control. She could choose to focus on what nourished her spirit, seek meaningful interactions, and embrace her own worth. This quiet empowerment was a gift, one that she could carry into the future, allowing her to navigate life with a clearer perspective and a stronger sense of self. She walked through the quiet streets, the air cool against her skin, carrying with her a sense of calm and clarity that she hadn't felt when she arrived at the cafe. The events of the evening replayed in her mind, not with sadness or disappointment, but with a sense of appreciation for the unexpected turn her night had taken. She reflected on the blind date, the initial awkwardness, and the way she had felt invisible. That part of the night no longer held power over her. It was a distant memory, softened by the unexpected encounter with the stranger who had offered her understanding and perspective. She realized how small moments of kindness could leave a lasting impact. The stranger had listened without judgment, spoken with warmth, and offered insights that were simple yet profound. He had reminded her that attention, validation, and connection often appeared in unexpected ways, and that she had the ability to recognize and nurture them herself. The feeling of empowerment that had grown during their conversation now accompanied her with each step, a quiet confidence that made her posture straighter, her steps lighter. As she passed a small park, she noticed the way the streetlights cast soft shadows on the leaves, the gentle rustle of the trees, and the occasional chirp of a nightbird. She felt a renewed appreciation for the world around her, a sense of noticing what had often gone overlooked. The evening had taught her to be present, to recognize small joys, and to find meaning in moments that might seem ordinary at first glance. She smiled softly to herself, feeling a warm contentment spread through her. She thought about the lessons she had learned from the stranger's stories, about resilience, self-awareness, and the importance of valuing one's own presence. It wasn't about grand gestures or life-changing events, but about small intentional actions that nurtured her sense of self and created space for meaningful interactions. She realized that the disappointment of the blind date had been temporary, a contrast that made the evening's true lesson even more poignant. Walking past the glowing windows of cafes and shops, she reflected on how she had initially focused all her energy on seeking validation from someone who hadn't been fully present. That focus had drained her and left her feeling small. Now she understood that she could direct her energy toward herself, toward the moments and people that truly mattered. She could create her own experiences, her own connections, and her own sense of fulfillment. She remembered the small joys she had shared with the stranger, the laughter, the stories, the reflections on everyday happiness. Those moments had reminded her that connection was about presence, attentiveness, and genuine engagement. She realized she could carry this awareness into her daily life, seeking meaningful interactions and appreciating the people who truly valued her presence. It was a quiet power, but one that would guide her in future experiences. As she continued her walk, she passed a bookstore and paused, drawn in by the warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. She entered and wandered through the aisles, feeling the familiar comfort of books around her. She picked up a few titles that had caught her eye before, feeling the texture of the pages, smelling the scent of printed words, and allowing herself to be fully immersed in the experience. It was another small act of self-care, another reminder that she could find joy and fulfillment in simple pleasures, independent of others' attention. She thought about the people in her life who had supported her, those who had listened, encouraged, and cared. She felt a wave of gratitude, realizing that meaningful connections existed all around her, even if they sometimes went unnoticed. The stranger's kindness had reminded her to be more aware, to appreciate the impact that attention and presence could have, and to cultivate those qualities herself. She left the bookstore with a couple of books tucked under her arm, smiling at the small purchases she had made for herself. The city streets were quiet now, the hustle of the evening giving way to a peaceful rhythm. She felt present, aware, and grounded, carrying with her the lessons of the night. Her mind reflected on the simplicity and depth of the conversation she had shared, the genuine connection that had arisen unexpectedly, and the empowerment she had gained. As she neared her apartment building, she thought about how she would approach future experiences differently. She realized that she didn't need to seek validation from those who were distracted or uninterested. Instead, she could focus on her own awareness, her own growth, and the small moments of joy and connection that truly mattered. She felt a sense of freedom in that realization, a quiet liberation from the weight of expectation and disappointment. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, the familiar comfort of home wrapping around her. She placed her books on the table and took a moment to sit quietly, reflecting on the night. The initial disappointment of the blind date had been transformed into a valuable lesson about presence, connection, and self-awareness. She felt grateful for the stranger who had offered guidance and perspective without expectation, allowing her to reclaim her evening and her sense of confidence. Sitting in her living room, she allowed herself to fully absorb the experiences of the evening. She understood that life's meaningful moments often came quietly, without warning, and that the impact of a kind word or genuine attention could be profound. She felt a deep appreciation for the simplicity and authenticity of human connection, and for the ways it could transform an experience, even one that had started with disappointment. She thought about the future with a renewed sense of possibility. She could approach new experiences, new encounters, and new challenges with a mindset shaped by the lessons of the evening. She could recognize her own worth, appreciate the value of attentive presence, and cultivate connections that were meaningful and genuine. It was a quiet but powerful sense of empowerment, one that would guide her in both ordinary and extraordinary moments. As she prepared for bed, she reflected on the transformation of her evening, from nervous anticipation to awkward disappointment, and finally to unexpected understanding and personal growth. She felt lighter, more confident, and more aware of the ways she could create meaningful experiences in her own life. The night had reminded her that even in moments of invisibility or being overlooked, there were opportunities for connection, learning, and empowerment. Lying in bed, she thought about the stranger's words one last time. The importance of noticing oneself, the value of presence, and the impact of kindness. She felt a quiet smile form on her lips, a sense of peace settling over her. The evening had been more than a blind date. It had been a lesson in human connection, self-awareness, and the power of simple, attentive interaction. She closed her eyes with gratitude, ready to carry the insights of the night into the days ahead, confident in the knowledge that even small moments could leave a lasting impact on her life.